Murder. The unlawful killing of one human by another, especially with premeditated malice.
John Lennon was brought to the emergency room at the Roosevelt site, St. Luke's Roosevelt Hospital, this evening, shortly before 11 p.m. He was dead on arrival.
On the 8th of December 1980, a security guard had to dial M for murder. The beloved musician was intentionally gunned down as he was returning home. Though the doctors frantically worked to undo the damage the 4 explosive bullets had caused, there was nothing that could be done. Before his death, John Lennon was considered one of the world's greatest singer-songwriters. His contributions through both the band The Beatles and his solo career are legendary and remain unmatched. Unfortunately, the night he was tragically murdered, the millions of people who had grown up listening to John's music, who had fallen in love with his messages of peace, lost their leader.
And no religion too.
The premature death of this international icon and its circumstances shocked and angered the world. John had spent his last night alive, that fateful night in December, with Yoko Ono recording Yoko's single, Walking on Thin Ice. They then returned to their apartment of 9 years. As he walked towards the archway, a young man yelled out, "Mr. Lennon," maliciously firing his gun 5 times. His serious condition saw the police at the scene decide to take him to Roosevelt Hospital themselves. Dr. Stephen Lynn, who was on duty at Roosevelt, led the efforts to save John's life. Photographs of him announcing the news of the rock legend's death accompanied an article in Rolling Stone magazine. The cause of his death was reported as hypovolemic shock, which was the result of losing over 80% of his blood. The effects of his death rippled through fans all around the world. After the news of John's death was broadcast, fans began gathering out the front of both the hospital and the Dakota apartment, burning candles, laying flowers and singing his songs. They were all sharing their grief and anger over his death, and more so, its circumstances. The young man responsible for John Lennon's death was Mark David Chapman, who was then 25. For reasons that no one will ever really understand, Chapman murdered John, who had earlier that day signed an autograph for him. With the Charter Arms revolver, Chapman hit John 4 times. All 4 bullets caused serious internal injuries. In the 60s, John had been asked how he expected to die. Believe it or not, his reply was that he'd probably be popped off by some loony. His prediction may have been meant as a joke, but turned out to be sadly accurate. More than 25 years later, fans still remember the legendary singer and peace activist visiting the site where he was murdered. Across the road in Central Park West, there's a section of the park that's dedicated to John and named after one of his most well-known Beatles songs, Strawberry Fields. Fans gather there to take photographs of the Imagine plaque. Imagine is possibly the most famous song John recorded as a solo artist. Fans still miss John, his music and his message of peace, often pausing to remember that fateful evening. Dr. Lynn frequently recalls the night John was brought to his emergency room when he tried in vain to save his life.
I literally took his heart in my hand. I massaged it to try to get his heart going. We transfused blood, we gave him fluid, but we knew that the injuries that we were dealing with were simply beyond control.
John Lennon remains one of the world's most influential singer-songwriters. Before he was tragically murdered, he said he didn't consider himself as a leader, just a man who made music. However, it's clear he was, and still is, so much more.
I always felt like I'd be shot. Somebody tried to do me some harm because a lot of people don't like me.
The martyred icon of gangster rap, Tupac Shakur, became a legend not only in life, but also in death. One of the most controversial figures in music, his rivalry with fellow rappers marked his career with violence and prison time.
A story about ambition, violence, redemption.
On September 7, 1996, Tupac was shot 4 times in a drive-by shooting in Las Vegas, Nevada. 6 days after the shooting, the rapper died of respiratory failure and cardiac arrest at the University Medical Center in Las Vegas. Tupac's mother was a member of the civil rights group the Black Panthers, and it was from her, the rapper said, that he got his strength.
My mother was a Black Panther, so all of my roots to the struggle are real deep.
The admiration was mutual, his mother recognizing early that Tupac had the power to change lives.
My son was a magic person, a magical person. In our personal lives, he was our star. He made our whole lives shine. And we love him because he was so very, very talented.
Constantly in trouble with the law, Tupac was released from prison after being arrested for sexual assault in 1993, thanks to the influence of Marion "Suge" Knight, CEO of Death Row Records. Suge posted the $1.4 million bail, in exchange for which the troubled rapper was obligated to release 3 albums for the Death Row label, including the #1 hit, California Love. In the lead-up to his tragic murder, Tupac downplayed his involvement in the most famous rap feud of recent times, the East Coast-West Coast hip-hop rivalry.
Don't look at me and Biggie and be like, why is there a big East Coast-West Coast war when you're shooting this to 300 homes, 300 countries, telling them about an East Coast-West Coast war that they would never know exists. So that's
one of the main figures in the feud between his Death Row Records label and Bad Boy Records, Tupac wanted to share the responsibility of ending the bad blood.
We'll try to be better role models, and y'all try to stop putting that drama out there. You got a lot of power, a lot of responsibility. We both do. We both need to exercise greater restraint.
Just 3 days later, the legendary rapper was tragically gunned down at the peak of his career. On that tragic night, Tupac attended the Mike Tyson-Bruce Seldon boxing match at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas with Suge Knight.
What do you think of Brewster? That was a wonderful thing.
At approximately 11:15 p.m, the two left in Suge's black BMW sedan, and while stopped at an intersection, Tupac was shot through the windows. He was hit 4 times, twice in the chest and once in each arm, while Suge was scratched in the head by a piece of flying glass. His killer has never been caught.
We live in hell. We live in the gut. We are living in a war zone. By the time you get out your house...
The rapid rise and fall of Tupac remains one of the most enigmatic stories in rap music history.
Hopefully they'll stop it. I'm doing it for the kid that really lives a thug life and feels like it's hopeless, that it's like I reach him.
Even years after his death, he has sold a total of 67 million records worldwide, making him the highest-selling rap hip-hop artist of all time. While his talent could never be questioned, he felt a sense of duty to instill sparks of hope through his words of encouragement and rebellion.
I always knew that Tupac was talented and creative, but the other thing I always knew was the weight that he carried.
Actress Jada Pinkett Smith shared a close relationship with the rapper from the time they met as teenagers up until his death.
He was like a brother. The type of relationship we had, you only get that once in a lifetime, so he was like a brother-father figure to me.
Among the most dynamic and influential hip-hop artists of all time, Tupac Shakur is considered a hero to some, a martyr to others, and a legend by all. Growing up dreaming of being a celebrity, it was only in death that Bonny Bakley got her fame. The story of how she ended up in Hollywood, married to a one-time big-name star, reads like a movie script and ended in someone dialing M for murder. After an acting career that spanned more than 60 years, Robert Blake was arrested and charged with the shooting murder of his wife and mother of his daughter Rosie. On the night of May 4, 2001, Robert took Bonny Lee, his wife of 6 months, to dinner at Vitello's Italian restaurant. After dinner, the two walked to their car and, according to Robert, he realised he left his revolver, which he was carrying for protection, at the restaurant and left to retrieve it. When he returned to the car, he found Bonny Lee dead in the front seat with a gunshot wound to her head. Robert was arrested in 2002 and charged in connection with the murder of his wife. His longtime bodyguard, Earl Caldwell, was also arrested and charged with conspiracy in connection with the murder. In 2005, Robert was found not guilty of the murder of Bonny Lee and of one of the 2 counts of soliciting a former stuntman to murder her. The jury voted 11-1 in favour of acquittal.
Superior Court of the State of California, County of Los Angeles. People of the State of California versus Robert Blake. We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant, Robert Blake, not guilty of the crime of first-degree murder of Bonny Lee Bakley, in violation of...
Prosecutors argued Robert despised Bonny Lee, who was described in court by both sides as a career con artist.
Deputy District Attorney Shelley Samuels and the Los Angeles Police Department detectives put together what we believe to be a solid, circumstantial case against Robert Blake in the murder of his wife, Bonny Bakley. We believe the evidence was compelling. We presented the evidence to the jury fully, honestly, and professionally. Unfortunately, these jurors disagreed with our view of the evidence.
No eyewitnesses' blood or DNA evidence linked Robert to the crime. The murder weapon found in a rubbish bin could not be traced to him, and witnesses said the minuscule amounts of gunshot residue found on his hands could have come from a different gun he said he carried for protection. Prosecutors said Robert believed that Bonny Lee had trapped him into marriage by getting pregnant. They said he soon became smitten with his child Rosie and desperately wanted to keep her away from his wife, whom he considered an unfit mother. A year after he was acquitted in criminal court, the former tough guy actor began planning his acting comeback.
I was in the middle of a job when my father committed suicide. I went to work the next day because that's my norm. You know, a comic has to make people laugh no matter what the hell's going on in life. There are days when I'm hysterical, but nobody would ever pay me for it because I'm only funny when I feel like being funny. But I can act no matter what. And I could do that when I was 2 years old. That's just my gag. So, as a prisoner, I suck. As an actor, they pay me.
The actor who played the hard-boiled cop in the 1970s TV show Beretta now spends his days exercising Arabian horses at a friend's ranch above the Pacific Ocean. Bonny Lee was reportedly a woman with a history of exploiting older men for money, especially celebrities. Before meeting Robert, she was dating Christian Brando, son of Marilyn. When DNA tests proved that Robert was in fact the biological father of her daughter, the actor married her. It was his second marriage, her 9th. In death, Bonny Lee Bakley achieved what she wanted most in her life, to be among the stars. Actress Lana Clarkson would sadly gain more career attention in death than in life. In early 2003, the world of film lost a shining personality as Lana's life was abruptly ended with a bullet. She was 40 years old. Her alleged killer, legendary rock producer Phil Spector, is one of the greatest producers of rock and roll music. A pioneer in pop record production, Phil is famed for his wall of sound technique that featured orchestration with strings and horns added to the spare instrumentation of rock music. Voted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1989, Phil developed a reputation as a temperamental, reclusive and erratic genius. He has produced records for the Rolling Stones, the Beatles, Eric Clapton and the Righteous Brothers. In 1970, he was hired by the Beatles to do post-production work on their Let It Be album, which Paul McCartney and many critics later criticised as overdone. Lana Clarkson was a down-on-her-luck actress who had appeared in numerous B-movies, most notably Barbarian Queen, directed by Roger Corman. To make ends meet, she'd taken a job at the House of Blues in West Hollywood, where she worked as a hostess in the Foundation Room, the club's VIP lounge. It was there that she met the legendary rock and roll producer in the early morning hours of February 3, 2003. After leaving with Phil and going back to his palatial mansion, only 2 people know what happened next. Police responded to a 911 phone call from one of Phil's neighbours, and upon arrival, investigators found Lana, who had been shot dead. When questioned, Phil claimed that Lana killed herself by putting a gun in her mouth and firing it. After an extensive investigation, police believed the evidence suggested otherwise, and that Phil had been the one who had pulled the trigger. Police took Phil into custody on suspicion of murder charges shortly after they arrived at his mansion.
The officers arrived at the scene and discovered a female had been shot inside the location. The victim was pronounced dead. Mr. Philip Spector from Motown Records has been arrested and booked for murder. Our sheriff homicide investigators are assisting with this investigation. The body of the victim is still at the location. Her identity and age has not been disclosed.
Neighbours said the producer was rarely seen at the 10-bedroom home they called the Castle and seemed to live a quiet life.
We just saw him once in a while drive down the hill and stuff. That was about it.
Was it quiet?
Yeah, there was hardly anything ever going on up there. Once in a while you see the limousine or something, somebody going up there, but that's about it.
An autopsy report found that the actress had been killed by a single gunshot after the weapon was placed in her mouth. Phil pleaded innocent to the charges during an LA court appearance. Following the announcement of the indictment, Phil maintained his innocence and claimed, in fact, that he was a victim.
No crime was committed at my home on February 3rd, 2003, and the public will find that out as well, and that this district attorney is pursuing a personal vendetta without evidence. If not, why will he not let me have a preliminary hearing guaranteed me under a California Constitution? Instead, he secretly, as fascists would, went to a secret grand jury to seek and get an indictment. Why?
With the evidence mounting against him, prosecutors claimed the reclusive music producer had a history of pointing guns at people and once forced Dee Dee Ramone to play bass at gunpoint. Guilty or not, only Lana Clarkson and Phil Spector know the truth. Marilyn Munroe was the epitome of sex appeal. The troubled actress died having made only 23 films in her lifetime, but her legendary status and mysticism will remain with film history forever and still resonates in popular culture. Her death shocked a nation.
One of the most famous stars in Hollywood history is dead at 36. Marilyn Monroe was found dead in bed, under circumstances that were in tragic contrast to her glamorous career as a comic talent.
On August 5, 1962, her housekeeper found her lifeless body lying face down on her bed, naked. Was this the case of a simple overdose or something more sinister? Her death was ruled a probable suicide, but many conspiracies grew up around her death, several linked to the romantic relationship she was rumoured to have had with President John F. Kennedy and his brother Robert.
Miss Monroe played in 23 films since her debut in 1950, films that grossed $200 million. The Golden Girl received 5,000 fan letters a week, and to those fans, she never let any personal problems dim her screen glamour. Despite flashes of temperament and tantrums, she turned in performances that kept her among the greatest box office favorites in motion picture history.
Marilyn had an intoxicating quality of volcanic sexuality wrapped in an aura of almost childlike innocence.
Very much so.
When this blonde bombshell seduced audiences in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, no one would have imagined she'd meet such a tragic fate.
I think he's got a present for me. You know, I think you're the only girl in the world that can stand on a stage with a
The 7-year itch saw Marilyn showcase her considerable comedic talent and contained what is arguably one of the most memorable moments in cinema history. Marilyn standing above a subway grating and the wind from a passing subway blowing her white dress up.
Oh, do you feel the breeze from the subway? Isn't it delicious?
Signs of her troubled emotional state first appeared a year before her death. She began taking painkillers to deal with stress, and due to her habit of being continually late to film sets and putting production over budget, she was fired from 20th Century Fox. It looked as though the screen siren's career was finished, and she went into seclusion in her home in LA. On the night of August 5, doctors were summoned to Marilyn's Hollywood home. She was found naked in her bed with an empty bottle of sleeping pills by her side. The local coroner who visited the scene later said the circumstances of Miss Munroe's death indicated a possible suicide. The exact details around Marilyn's death sparked a debate that would last more than 40 years and generate many theories, including that of murder. While some of these theories implicated John and Robert Kennedy in her mysterious death, rumours swirled about the involvement of the mafia, although none were ever confirmed. It's widely accepted that Marilyn's death was the result of a tragic drug overdose, but was the lethal amount administered by someone other than Marilyn herself? Many believe her affairs with the Kennedy brothers meant she knew too much about the political dynasty's mafia links and was threatening to go public to get back at John for ending their relationship. The image of Marilyn has haunted generation after generation. Her sex appeal, talent and untimely death combined to make her an enduring star and one of Hollywood's most recognisable icons. Alive or dead, Marilyn Monroe is never far from controversy. Was her death at the peak of her career an accident, murder or suicide? We may never know.